Hi, welcome back to Freedom TV. We're going to be talking about memory, long and short-term memory, and what affects it in this video. So the first thing we're going to be starting with is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is really crucial for memory because what it does is it processes the short-term and the long-term memory. And what happens over time is if we don't take care of this part of our brain, it starts to shrink. And what I'm going to be doing is going over the different factors that contribute to this area of the brain shrinking, and I'll cover the solutions of how you can actually regenerate this part of the brain. So the hippocampus has to do with short-term, long-term memory, and spatial location. So this would be, say, if you are in a parking lot and you're trying to figure out where your car is parked. Or if you're in town and you're wanting to navigate, just being able to spatially locate and orient yourself. So if you've noticed a decline in this particular function of your brain, your memory, then more than likely you might be doing one of the following things that I'm going to talk about that actually damages that part of your brain. We're also talking about dementia and Alzheimer's. So these are different diseases that affect the brain function. And we know that there are certain activities that contribute to these specific diseases. So first of all, we're going to look at diet, and specifically high insulin and also cortisol. But let's look at insulin first. So it's really important that you make sure that you're not eating excess sugar, or you're not eating carbohydrates that are cheap carbohydrates. So this would be like chips or refined kinds of carbohydrates, fast food, breads, things like this. And what we found is that insulin or too much sugar in the body will cause serious problems with the ability to remember things and for the hippocampus to actually function. Now, the exciting thing about the hippocampus as part of the brain is it's the only part of the brain that can actually regenerate itself. And the first way to do this is by changing your diet, getting rid of the sugars, getting rid of the low-quality carbohydrates. And what this will do is actually allow that part of the brain to heal itself. And there's another really powerful technique that you can use to do this, and it's called intermittent fasting. And so intermittent fasting directly affects insulin, so the body's ability to actually uptake glucose or sugar. So the brain runs off of glucose, which is a kind of sugar that's very, very simple. And what happens is the insulin is a key, and it allows for this glucose to go in and out of cells. So if there's an impairment with the actual insulin in the body, then the problem is you're going to have this impairment with the key to allow that glucose to come into, let's say, the brain cells and function properly. So it's very, very important that you look at this part. Now, the second part I want to talk about is stress. And we know how stress affects all aspects of our life, but prolonged stress, cortisol response, it degrades that part of the brain, affecting the memory. So let's look at some of the solutions for reversing that and allowing the hippocampus to heal. The first thing we talked about is the diet and intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting, really simply, is where you go for a period of, let's say, 10 to 12 hours of not eating anything. So you go to bed at, let's say you have your dinner at 6 o'clock, and then you don't eat breakfast until 10 or 11 o'clock the next day. That would be an example of intermittent fasting. Now, the second solution is walking. Activity is incredibly helpful for us two-legged humans. We're designed to walk and move around during the day and not sit down. So activity cardiovascular activity, long walks. This is really going to help. Now, you want to make sure that you have ample amounts of vitamin B1. And this is also going to help with that repair. And B1, you can find it in lots of different foods. Here's a chart right here. And you can also get it in nutritional yeast. I've already mentioned stress. Prolonged stress isn't good for anybody or anything. Short little moments of stress hormones or adrenaline is perfectly normal. But if you have prolonged stress in your life, then I would really recommend looking into breathing techniques, meditation techniques, and also just getting out in nature, making sure that you're walking around and you can kind of take the thinking mind and put it down. But there's lots of different ways to help with stress. So glucose is really the energy for the brain. And so if we have any kind of impairment or problem with insulin, which is commonly referred to as insulin resistance, then the memory is going to be directly affected because the brain isn't going to be able to get ample fuel to be able to function properly. So what's really interesting about this, so different PET scans have shown that low glucose metabolism is apparent in people who have dementia or Alzheimer's. So that's pointing here at this connection to the way that the body metabolizes sugar and how insulin functions. So I hope this was really helpful for you. These are some really quick things that you can implement immediately and see a difference within a few weeks. Thanks so much for joining me.